Thank you, mate. That was chapter and verse on a simple business of jetting out to Spain and back, but it being turned into an absolute saga by the continuing chaos. I've had an update from Heathrow Airport, from the queue, from my top source in the queue. It's someone who's hoping to fly to Hanover in Germany from Terminal 2. People keep cutting the line, sometimes not deliberately. The airlines don't know what's going on either, so they lead people to the middle of the line. People are getting very angry about it. I just saw an argument between a guy who was going to miss his flight unless he jumped the queue and everyone else. So, if what Paul tells us is happening a lot, you've got people turning up really, really early. And now I understand why Bristol Airport are blaming it on people turning up early, despite the fact that Paul was told to turn up early. They're going to be in the same queue as someone whose flight's about to take off. And no one wants to be that person. Did I ever tell you about the time that I was told I couldn't board a flight and I begged? No? I may treat you to that tale if things don't pick up. 11:30 is the time. If you can't get through at the moment, be patient. I appreciate everyone has got stories, but I'm trying to find explanations and then experiences that are emblematic of lots and lots of people. So if your story was very similar to Paul's, I'm probably not going to have time to talk to you today. Do you see what I mean? I hope you do. Rebecca Cook is here now with the headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. Far be it from me to give lessons to anybody still working on Fleet Street. I've told you a few times my ability to miss stories when I was a newspaper journalist 157 years ago was absolutely incredible. Working on showbiz, I think if I'd worked on politics, I know I would have been a little bit better off, but I had no interest in doing political journalism back then, no interest at all. But the more I think about this, and actually I'll give you an example of a story I missed in a minute, even this week. The more I think about it, the more I wonder whether the Times have got this story on page 3 upside down, and rather than the apparent tensions between the head housekeeper at Chequers, who has resigned after claims of tensions with Carrie Johnson, the fact that Johnson has hired up to 4 new members of staff to cope with the demands of him and his wife after years of cuts to the staff being undertaken, begun by David Cameron 10 years ago. They've been cuts in the number of servants at Chequers ordered by David Cameron 10 years ago during the austerity era have been reversed under Boris Johnson. According to one source, up to 4 extra members of staff were taken on. So in the midst of a cost of living crisis, in the context, as we know, of members of staff being treated appallingly within Downing Street while Johnson and his cronies were partying, he thinks it's appropriate to hire up to 4 new servants on the public ticket. He's not going to be paying for them himself, is he? He's supposed to pay for sort of food and drink himself. Also reports in the same story that he was trying to use Chequers before he was actually allowed to, just sort of phoning up and saying, we're coming tomorrow, we're coming today. Just yet more evidence, if you like, of this curious combination of arrogance and entitlement that seems to run through Boris Johnson like Blackpool through a stick of rock. The story I saw this week and missed, there's a big tale today about a council has been criticised over plans to install a pizza vending machine in a beachside car park. Patrons of the D-Day Story car park in Southsea, Hampshire will be able to order pizza from a vending machine operated by the company Pizza Rebellion if the proposal goes ahead. And it says the Pizza Rebellion machines are the first of their kind in the UK. Now, I don't know if it was the same company, but I was in Brighton last week. I had a fascinating visit to the university in Brighton. I gave a speech to the journalism students, which was lovely, actually. Thank you for having me. And there was a pizza vending machine in Brighton Station. As I walked past, I smelt it. I went, that smells nice. Where's the pizza place? And it's a vending machine. I know you know how vending machines work, but give a guy a break. You put money in it or put your card in and order a pizza. And you can specify the toppings that you want. So either there's sort of Oompa Loompas inside making pizzas, or they've got an amazing robotic... So I walked past it. I thought, I've never seen one of those before. I must remember to mention that on the radio, because that sounds like quite an interesting new innovation. And then, as was my regular experience when I worked on newspapers, a week later I see it in the papers and think, I completely forgot to mention that story. And there it is. So I don't know. I just think the idea of the Prime Minister and his wife hiring extra staff, extra servants at Chequers in the current economic crisis is something that I would personally have put perhaps in the headline rather than the tensions between Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's current wife, and the former housekeeper at Chequers, the Grace and Favour house that the Prime Minister enjoys the use of. Back to holidays. Actually, don't need any more words from me on this. John's in Islington. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, John. Thanks for... hi, James. Thanks for bringing this up.
You're very welcome. It's not just me. I mean, it is in every news outlet in the country. So
yeah, I know, but I'm a pilot, and from a pilot's perspective,
yes,
this has been kind of swept under the rug, and no one's really talked about it, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah,
when so many of us lost our livelihoods.
I had pilots telling me that during the pandemic, but I didn't add them up enough. I just sort of thought I was speaking to some unlucky people or speaking to exceptions to the rule. But you think there's been a filleting of the workforce in a way? It's
decimated our industry more than anything. I think it's made 9/11 look relatively benign compared to what that did to the industry, to what's happened to it now.
Gosh.
This has been a kind of a recipe that's been brewing for years and years and years. And it's the catalyst, I suppose, the enzyme was COVID and the stand down and the simple lack of flying going on. But immediately after that happened, airline bosses throughout the world, really, I can only think of one in the UK that didn't indiscriminately lay off lots and lots of staff.
Which
and that was
one?
Jet2. They went on to reduced pay and conditions.
But why? Just help me out with this. Why would they lay everybody off? If furlough,
and this has been brewing for years and years and years. Airline management has become. It used to be people who were in the aviation industry ran airlines.
Yeah.
And now it's it's gone the way of, I guess, a lot of other industries. But I know this one firsthand. And it's gone the way of bean counters. And it's how can we save and cut this and cut that and cut this and cut that. And eventually there won't be anything left. So in immediate...
but I mean, I'm not being thick. You can't fly planes unless you've got pilots. So the wisdom... I mean, in other industries, I can see how the bean counting kicks in. But in the airline industry, how could they imagine they could fly planes without having enough pilots?
Honestly, my honest opinion is they thought, we'll get them on furlough now. Would make them fully redundant. Right. And then once things pick up, they'll all just come flocking back.
Okay.
What they didn't think, first of all, was pilots will, in the space of 2 years, become uncurrent. We have to keep up currency requirements that are really stringent. It's not just like hopping back on a bike. You have to, if you've missed your checks, we're in the simulator once every 3 months, line checks with training captains every year. It happens constantly, and there's constant exams at every single turn and every corner. And you miss one of those events, well, now you've got to do a course to catch up on that event, like if you've been on long-term sick.
What did you do?
Well, the airline I work for, it's a British-owned airline,
right?
But we're based in Hong Kong. And I was on one of the London base of this airline.
Yes.
And they decided we had overseas bases in everywhere as a big part of our business because we're a global airline. And they decided to use COVID as an excuse to cut the bases because European labour laws were slightly better than those in Hong Kong. And it was also a way to make pilots redundant because they knew a lot of people wouldn't have the right to live and work in Hong Kong, where they did offer us our jobs back in Hong Kong, but a lot were just simply unable to take it.
Of course, including you.
No, I actually did take it, so I am back in Hong Kong, commuting back and forth at the moment, which isn't particularly easy. But,
but it was. I mean, that's kind of what they're banking on, is that people will feel that they have little choice but to take it, and they've been surprised by. They've been surprised.
The airline in particular, I'm talking about, has at least I still have my job. But
yes,
from a perspective of worldwide, and this is quite acute in the US as well. This way of kind of getting rid of pilots from other airlines and then trying to retrain them later. There simply aren't enough simulators to clear that backlog. If someone's been grounded for 2 years, the return to flying protocol is enormous. So
that's a helpful bit of information. That's just pilot. No, I understand that. I'm just sorry to hurry you, but that you're not used to being interrupted when you're on the microphone, are you?
Sorry, there's a lot of information to get.
Of course there is. No, I understand that. So I've got a clearer picture of pilots. We don't know what the breakdown is of how many flights are being cancelled or delayed because of pilot shortages. But
it's quite a lot. From I hear anecdotally from a lot of friends who are UK airlines.
Gosh.
If I can just add one more thing, and the background of this for say the last 20 years is there used to be a standard conveyor belt of pilots wanting to join the industry. It was seen as a glamorous, well-paid job. You might have been lower paid to begin with, but it was seen as like a
it's a sexy job. Let's not beat about the bush, John.
It was. I mean, you look at Catch Me If You Can, and Leonardo
that's exactly what I was just thinking of. The Leonardo DiCaprio walking through the airport. Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that.
But people now, airlines don't sponsor and you used to join as apply to British Airways, and they pay for your training, and then you'd get a job with BA as soon as you finished. Yeah, that stopped in the mid 2000s, really. So now everyone who wants to become a pilot in the UK, Europe, America, you pay for all the training yourself. That's gone up to nearly £100,000. Wow. Who can afford that? And now you get your first job with Ryanair, and you're not paid for the first 100-odd sectors, I think it is, when you're line training. So it's
just become a much less attractive job at a time when they're desperate to attract people to doing it. So some of it's unforeseeable.
People who've got wealthy parents who can afford to put them through flying school. Yeah. That's really what it's becoming, and that perhaps won't stick it out for as long.
And they might have got away with it, or at least got away with it for longer, if it wasn't for the huge shock to the system of COVID, of coronavirus.
I think so. And I think it was just quite short-sighted to think, right, we can save a few pennies
on this year's balance sheet. We can save a ton of money because that will, give better dividends to shareholders.
Time, that would have all.
Will be an airport. Will be an airline without any pilots, which is not exactly a recipe for good business. Crikey. Well, I mean, I'm glad you're still in a job, I suppose. But equally, there'll be people who have decided that it's not for them anymore, either as potential pilots or actual pilots. It's incredible. 11:43 is the time. Let's squeeze in Louise, who's in Manchester. I want to speak to General Sir Richard Barrons a little later this hour. He, as you know, is a former commander of UK Joint Forces Command. I just want to catch up with what's happening in Ukraine. But Louise is on the line from Manchester. Louise, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, my daughter recently qualified as cabin crew, and she's now been waiting over 5 weeks to actually start because of the security checks, the references, the company that the airline used. She tells me they're absolutely useless. She's got a DBS back, right, and she's literally sat waiting to board a plane. Really? This is one of the reasons there's not enough cabin crew either.
Because there's not enough people dealing with the applications and the processes and the bureaucracy that you need to do, but which has again been completely banjaxed by staff shortages.
Yeah, so she started training nearly 2 months ago, and they didn't start, and they had to ring up every day to chase them, saying, how my reference is going, She qualified. She was still chasing her references. They check every reference for the past 5 years, and can be no misses in the dates.
Well, I don't mind that times. To be honest, because
but hang on, James.
I'm hanging.
If a company's gone bust,
right, they
still write to them 3 times.
So its computer says no.
Yeah, and then they have to get a DWP reference to fit if they've been unemployed or there's any gaps. Then they have to get a character reference after that. And then that was over a week and a half ago, and then they didn't like the character reference because the person who filled it in got one date on it wrong, so it had to be filled in again, and now she's still sat waiting.
Has she got any idea when she'll be able to get on a plane?
No.
None at all? Just wait and see pie?
Yep.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, every call has been different this hour, largely thanks to the efforts of my colleagues, because I was quite keen not to have a succession of similar experiences, but every call coming from a completely different angle, from pilots, from people wanting to be ground cabin crew, from people who are cabin crew, from passengers being banjaxed. The tale from Bristol that perhaps is most remarkable is an American passenger who had to travel back to Bristol Airport yesterday after landing from the US the day before. He said, we flew in yesterday and had to walk about half a mile to get into the baggage claim area. We waited for about an hour, and then they just told us to fill in a form. We filled it out and we're still left waiting for the bag, so we've had to come back today. There was no one working on the desks. But hey-ho, I remember, the employment market is brilliant evidence of Boris Johnson doing a bang-up job, as Boris Johnson keeps telling you. 11:49 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next as we, I keep meaning to, but like the rest of British media, the initial coverage of Ukraine has tailed off somewhat, and I'm embarrassed by that, and I'm worried by it, because nothing in Ukraine is tailing off, far from it. So we are endeavouring to find ways, bearing in mind this is chiefly a phone-in programme, and with the greatest of love and respect, I'm no more interested in what you think about what's going on in Ukraine than you are in what I think about it. So we are hoping to find ways of keeping coverage or returning to slightly more comprehensive coverage. And few people can help us more than General Sir Richard Barrons, a former commander, of course, of UK Joint Forces Command. And forgive me if any of my questions display ignorance, Sir Richard, but I think it was fair to say that the initial failure of Plan A for Vladimir Putin was widely perceived as very good news for Ukraine and therefore the wider world. But there were grave warnings at the time that the longer it then went on, then the better equipped, in every sense of the word, Russia would be to cope with a long, drawn-out engagement. There's a sense this week that we're in that sort of zone now, or very close to it. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair to summarise where we are now, which is, as you described, Russia failed badly in its initial phase of this campaign. Then it failed badly again in the way that it adjusted. But it is now succeeding in a very small way in the east, in the Donbass, because it has rediscovered how to really focus its firepower and its soldiers in a small area to essentially simply overwhelm the Ukrainian defense with artillery, followed up by attacks on foot and in armored vehicles. And that's why you're beginning to see more territory slowly, grindingly changing hands in the Donbass in the east, with the expectation that in the next few days, the next cities, Severodonetsk, will fall to Russian control.
And how significant is that? I mean, you talk about it being a small area and one city, but I suppose there's a propaganda war going on as well as a military war, isn't there? As there always is, the two go hand in hand. Will Putin be able to sell that to the Russian people as a justification for starting the war, never mind continuing it?
So this may be why we could be approaching a really decisive moment in this conflict so far. So if Russia is successful in capturing perhaps 80% of the Donbass, and they're not there yet, but they're not that far off it either, then Russia will be able to say, look, when the war opened, we sat on 7% of Ukraine. We now occupy about 20% of Ukraine, excluding Crimea. We have, quote, liberated much of the Donbass where many Russian-speaking people live. It's far more complicated than that,
of course,
but they will claim it. And we've built a land bridge from Russia to Crimea. And that might look like victory, or at least enough of a victory. But behind it, there are two really important points. The first is the Russian military simply running out of steam? This enormous effort in a small part of the Donbass may be draining their military to the point that they're going to run out of steam and have to stop, at least for this year. Or have they got enough in reserve to do more in the Donbass and then go back south and open the war for Odessa this summer, autumn? That currently looks beyond them, but it's probably in their ambitions. And then the other side of the coin is, as you described, the Ukrainian military did really well in the opening phases of this war. And now they simply cannot stop this Russian steamroller, even though it's slow. And that's why they're asking for more heavier weapons with longer ranges. And that will take time to turn up. But from the Ukrainian perspective, if they lose the Donbass, or most of it, and even if Russia then says, we annex this territory, it's now part of Russia and it sits behind our nuclear umbrella, that Ukraine will not give up at that point. And they're now firmly attached to our will, our money, our stocks and industry. And they will want to rebuild the offensive capability to take their country back. That may be next year. So we shouldn't think that an outcome now in the Donbass, which may result in a sort of stalemate, means that we're anywhere near the end of this conflict.
It's quite a maximalist analysis, if that's the right word to use, particularly from the Ukrainian perspective. They will not be satisfied, despite the interventions of people like Henry Kissinger, with any sort of negotiated settlement that allows Russia to walk away with more of Ukraine than they started the war with. And similarly, as you've just explained, it may be that they move on from Donbass to Odessa and return or revivify the ambition of conquering the entire country. I'd be very interested to know, Sir Richard, where you stand on the notion of Western powers, most obviously the United Kingdom, because that's where we're having this conversation, enforcing the rhetoric of maximalism from the Ukrainian point of view while not actually joining in. I don't know whether there's a growing frustration coming out of Kiev, but our foreign policy pronouncements speak to support for the idea of a full rejection of Russia by Ukraine. And yes, we are sending a lot of support, and yes, we've led the line on it. But does there come a point where that's not really, unless you're prepared to join in, you can't really be encouraging Volodymyr Zelensky to keep pursuing a military option as opposed to a jaw, if you like?
So we need to be very careful that we're not guilty of fighting this war to the last Ukrainian.
Precisely.
Without joining in. But we also need to understand that we are part of this confrontation with Russia, short of actually having a war with Russia ourselves, which is in nobody's interest.
Right.
So two things I think are really important. One is that we support Ukraine with money, with care for their refugees and displaced people, and there are now more of them arriving in the UK, and with weapons, which will largely come from our industry more than from our armories, and the US are by far the major player in that. So that we support the Ukrainian will to take their country back, because it is clearly not in our interest for Russia to think that it can take over other people's countries by force and get away with it.
Yeah.
Because they'll come back for more in Ukraine, and they may come back for more elsewhere. And we should also recognize that every time you and I go to a shop or pay our energy bills or fill our cars up, we are making a contribution to this war because of the shock to global energy and food prices. And if this war is going to run into next year in one way or another, and I think it will, then we are going to have to keep the pressure on Russia by making it a pariah state, by cutting it off economically, culturally, and in every other way from a place in the international community, so that it feels that it is the loser in this war. And by any sensible standard, it is the loser in this war already.
And finally, a word, if you would, on President Biden's decision to rule out sending long-range missiles that could be used to strike Russia. He made that announcement yesterday before his Memorial Day address at the White House.
So I think that message has got a bit confused, because if you are Ukrainian and you're standing on the Russian border with a rifle, you have a weapon you can fire into Russia.
Yes.
What we're really talking about here is multiple launch rocket systems with ranges of 300 kilometers that would by design fire into Russia. And the point is, the Ukrainians need longer range artillery because they're outgunned by the Russian artillery, but they can use that in Ukraine. They know not to fire into Russia, because then the war becomes a bigger war.
Forgive me. So you can see wisdom in Biden's decision then?
I can see wisdom in Biden's decision in asserting that they're not supplying weapons that would allow Ukraine to take the war into Russia.
Got it.
But actually the weapons that they're going to provide them with to have enough range could theoretically do that. The point is, don't fire them into Russia.
Yes, it's a question of what they are designed to do rather than what they could be deployed to do in a sort of alternative universe.
Exactly that.
Fantastic. I knew you'd be the man to talk to today. Thank you very much indeed, General Sir Richard Barrons, a former commander of the UK Joint Forces Command, helping me and indeed you keep abreast of a situation which by design we can't cover in anything like the scale that we were in the early days of the war. But I was very conscious last week of not doing enough, which is something I will endeavour to rectify. Well, I won't just endeavour, I promise you, I will rectify it. And it means we need to return to the question of the refugees that Richard just referred to as well at some point. If not this week, then next. And that's only because I'm off for Thursday and Friday to celebrate Platty-Jubes, as all the cool people call it. It's coming up to 12 noon. Now, here's the thing. The next hour of the programme, I may have a quick word with Peter, actually, who's literally just come back from Birmingham Airport, despite the fact that he was expecting to be sunning himself in Turkey at this point in the day. So we'll get that example as well, just to get the full set, if you like, of contributions to the chaos and cancellation catastrophe at British airports. And then I've got a choice of 2 stories. One is about tattoos and one is about books. You have to be a fully paid up member of the JOB fan club to know what I'm about to say next. That's particularly interesting because there's an entire chapter about tattoos in my last book. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let us just wrap up the conversation about chaos and cancellations in airports. So I'll go straight to Peter, who is in Dudley. Peter, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, I couldn't be more in Dudley, James, if I tried right now. My goodness. So, we just got back. Our family have just got back after 24 hours at Birmingham Airport. Where we should be in Turkey by now. But, it's a mess. I think, obviously, we booked, there's a couple of things, right, that probably hasn't already been covered. But the one is that we didn't see a member of TUI anywhere in the last 24 hours. We were just dealt with the airport staff, with Swissair, even Jet2 actually staff stepped in and talked to us and helped us out at one point. Not a single TUI staff member to be seen at Birmingham Airport. But all the other staff did an incredible job at trying to help us out, got to be honest. And the other thing was that, like a high school relationship, we were dumped by text. TUI, and by that point there were like 300 of us at the local hotel by the airport after our flight had been cancelled for the night. We were all sat down in the restaurant with the hotel staff helping out as much as they possibly could. And we were in the restaurant, and all of a sudden, ping, 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 all the phones lit up of all the people that had booked with TUI who got this text message through to say, sorry, your holiday's been cancelled. The whole holiday. So our whole holiday has been cancelled and refunded, and we'll get compensation, all that stuff. But there was the thing that annoys me the most is that there was just a lack of communication. There's clearly not enough staff for TUI to go about for them to manage the holidays that they've sold. They cannot commit to, by the look of it, because there just isn't the staff anywhere. And the text message says something different from the email, says something different from the app.
It's just an almighty mess. And so that question that hangs over all of these conversations is, why on earth have they left the cancellation so late when you have the... What was the gap between the time at which the flight was originally scheduled to take off and the time at which you got the ping?
So the flight was meant to be just after 2 o'clock. We got there at 10, and it was already said, look, there's going to be delays. Right. And we got the cancellation by about 9 o'clock that night. So actually it wasn't as if we were hanging around forever. We knew that we were going to have an overnight stop. But they said, look, be assured you're going to go out tomorrow.
Oh, I see. So that's why you hung around.
We put you in a hotel is that we're going to put you on a flight tomorrow. It may not be the morning, it may be the afternoon, but we assure you will be on a flight tomorrow, which is obviously today. And then literally 45 minutes after we'd had that conversation with a very, very kind and bedraggled looking Swissair member of staff, we got the text through. So it was they obviously had been fed the wrong information by TUI or whoever that we were going to get on another flight.
It couldn't be more of a mess, in short, could it?
It's just it feels like there's just not enough people to do the job that we paid them to do, really.
And now we're talking about the travel agency. So we've had that testimony from the pilots, we've had it from the cabin crew, we've had it from the qualified cabin crew who can't get on board yet because of and now we've got it from the travel agent end of the conversation. What are you going to do if you just as a fellow dad?
We're probably going to go off to Dudley Zoo with our raincoats on this afternoon with the kids, and then
haven't they suffered enough?
I know.
No, I'm joking. Dudley Zoo is lovely, and you've got the castle.
I mean, where else could you go to see an asthmatic orangutan and then penguins with an asbo?
Exactly. I love Dudley Zoo. It was a treat when I was a kid.
There is nowhere else like it on the planet. So
if I may, I don't want to rob anything from the pockets of Dudley Zoo, but you're not that far from West Midlands Safari Park, which has got the fun fair as well. So
that's true. Yeah, I did work there once. So
did you?
I'm a big fan of West Midlands. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was my summer job.
What were you doing? Because I applied.
I worked on the rides there. James,
did you really? Oh well, you don't need me to tell you. Was it back in the days of the Cobra? Was it when they had the Cobra there?
It was after the Cobra.
Post-Cobra.
So it was the Black Fly. I helped build the Black Fly.
Look at that.
Yeah. So
well, you don't need me to tell you. I went for a job there after I left school somewhat unexpectedly, I applied for a job because my dad said, you're going to have to get a job, son. So I went down to the job centre. I took a card off the wall. I didn't understand everything on it. I went for a job as a sea lion trainer.
Wow.
I know. And I did quite well. I had to prove I could swim and that I wasn't scared of the sea lions. And then they said it was a YTS. And I didn't really know what that meant because I'd been at public school. And they explained to me what that meant and how much I would get paid. And so I went to work at River Island in Worcester instead. But it's a sliding door moment, Peter. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd followed my dream.
For that job.
You what?
We would have killed for that job.
Exactly.
We were stuck there watching plastic horses go round and round and round and round. We would have killed for that job. In fact, there was every so often there was the rare time where we could operate the airlock gates into the tiger enclosures.
Oh.
You know what I mean? And that was like the pinnacle. We knew that we'd arrived then, but I think they'd stopped doing that now. Yeah, but we would have killed for a seat.
But not on YTS wages though. You'd have been on a decent scratch. Well, I hope you find something to amuse the family. I really do. That's an absolute nightmare you've had today, isn't it?
Okay, but you know we're together and we're safe, and I feel almost a little bit guilty from this being a problem because of the weight of some of your other guests calling about Ukraine. There's so much other stuff.
That's because you're a good man, and I really respect that. It's a lovely thing to say. But you live the life you live, and the kids were expecting to be on holiday. You thought you'd be having a pina colada by the pool at this point. And you're not, and you know, you're right. It's not like you're at war, but it's still a right old pain in the proverbials. West Midlands Safari Park, and Dudley Zoo, if you're ever in the West Midlands. In fact, forget it, wherever you are in the world, make a trip to the West Midlands and try and tick them both off today. You'll see pretty much every animal under the sun, including... I haven't got the monkeys anymore at West Midlands Safari Park, actually. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. I suppose we should talk about what we're going to talk about for the next hour. This is one of my all-time favourite subjects. I do not know why. I may do both because we're ripping up the rule book today, yeah? You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. We did half an hour with Theo Usherwood at the top of the show. That's how confident we are now that everything will just go tickety-boo. I may do 2 topics this hour. But this is quite a sad story. It's been stated by the rather brilliant author Joanne Harris, who's probably best known for Chocolat, which of course was turned into a movie. She says that fathers are guilty of dissuading their sons from reading as they lead them to believe that it is a girly activity. This breaks my heart, actually. They're put under more pressure. Boys tend to be put under more pressure to play sports such as rugby. And speaking at the Hay Festival, which is a lovely literary festival, I'm not doing that one this year, but it's one of the biggest in town. When I was teaching boys particularly, I found that not only did they not read as much as girls, but they were put under much more pressure by parents, largely fathers, to do something else as if reading was girly. Which is robbing your child, robbing your son of so much. It's robbing him of an inner life in many ways. It's robbing him of the ability to escape from the quotidian, from the daily grind, from the rigmarole of the rat race. It's robbing him of a bigger vocabulary, a richer imagination, a better capacity for empathy. To not read, fiction in particular, but not exclusively, is a bit like imagine living in a mansion and only visiting 4 rooms in it. That is what you are turning life into if you don't read books. And I don't mean this in any sense of patronising way, because I do appreciate, as Joanne Harris does, the role that parents or the role that nurture can play in creating that appetite for reading books. There's something really sad about this. And she adds, it was a fight I had with parents over and over again. Parents would say to me, my boy reads too much. And she thinks the book industry bears some responsibility for these attitudes, revealing that she's never met men she has met men who are proud at never having read a book written by a woman. There's just a feeling within the industry that men write things that are for posterity and therefore are important, whereas women write for other women and therefore are slightly subhuman or a minority group somehow. Which is, in the country that gave the world Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf and Joanne Harris and many others. That's just ridiculous. Even in my favourite genre at the moment, which is historical crime fiction, some of the finest exponents of it are women, most obviously. Well, I'll give you some recommendations in the course of this hour, because this is where it becomes one of my favourite subjects. if you grew up in a house where reading wasn't encouraged, and when I do my full disclosure interviews, I always ask about it, or not always, but it very often comes up, the question of reading and were there books in your house? And the answers are, uniformly fascinating for a whole heap of reasons. And sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you think, I bet they grew up in a house with loads of books, or you think, I bet they grew up in a house with no books, and you get it the right. It's just something I find curious and fascinating. But if you grew up in a house where reading was not encouraged, what turned you on to books? The reason I love this topic is actually because of one caller who was just emblematic of the entire programs that we did on this. And I used to do it a lot. I don't know why we stopped. I guess things like Brexit and COVID and wars have distracted us from some of the softer subjects that we used to discuss together. But he was a squaddy obviously in the army. And he was coming back from a cross-country run, and the regimental sergeant major was there looking for, quotes, volunteers, end quotes. And he didn't fancy being given the job, whatever the job was. So he just snuck in to the library on the army base. It's a building, I think it said it was in a porter cabin. He'd never been in there before. And he just snuck into the library to hide from the sergeant major who was giving out skivvying jobs. And he picked up a book. And he's never looked back. And I love those, just talked about sliding door moments with Peter, although it was unlikely that I was ever going to pursue a full career in the world of sea lion training. But and to hear him tell the story, and I must be going back 10 years now, I bet you weren't even listening, were you? It was just magical. And so that's the only question I've got at the moment. I may add another one to the mix, but just to begin with, I'd like you to do two things. I'd like you to tell me about, take the father-son angle in particular if you want, but I guess I'm speaking chiefly to men when I say if you grew up in a house like the one that Joanne Harris describes, what saved you from a bookless life? 0345 6060 973. It may be a book, it may be a teacher, I don't know what it will be, but what saved you from a bookless life? 0345 6060 973. And I've had a fairly good go at it, but if you are a man, how would you prove to let's say a 13-year-old boy listening to this programme, how would you prove to him that books are not, quotes, girly, end quotes? And that's the word that Joanne Harris used. So I don't want to have a debate about whether the word itself is appropriate or not, or helpful. That's the word she's used. We all know what it means. So what would you say? So, when people ring in sometimes when fellas ring in to talk about mental health and stuff like that, and they're always at great pains, understandably, to stress, look, I'm 6'6" and I'm built like a brick outhouse, but I've just been diagnosed with depression, because it belies the myth that somehow physical fortitude conveys mental fortitude as well. We're all susceptible to mental health issues, regardless of whether you're built like Hulk Hogan or you're built like Duncan Norvell. I don't know. It's a stupid thing that I've had enormous amounts of help from some very enormous men in exploding over the years. And it's something similar today. How would you persuade? You got a 13-year-old. What about the worst one, which would be the lad? And I think about this a lot. That thing that happens around about puberty when you've got all these paths opening up in front of you, and because of peer pressure or because of lack of privilege or lack of luck or access, a kid who loved reading all through primary school stops reading when he gets to secondary school because his mates are laughing at him or something like that. If we can save one boy in that boat today, then our work here will not have been in vain. So come at those from any angle you like. All of that is good and all of it is interesting. And I promise that I won't plug my own books again, or indeed suggest that they might be a very useful way for teenage boys to discover a love of literature, partly because it would be a bit unseemly, although that's never really stopped me in the past, but chiefly because it would be untrue. I don't think they are books in particular that would help teenage boys discover a love for literature. 17 after 12 is the time. That number you need, once again, 0345 6060 973. It is 19 minutes after 12. How do you break the spell of a non-reading boy? 0345 6060 973. And if you were a non-reading boy, what broke the spell for you? John's in Derby to kick things off. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, John.
Massive fan of the show.
Thank you, man.
So I'm a reading leader at a primary school in Derby, and I was always a reader.
Okay.
I think because my house always had books in it. My dad worked at a printing press, and I would come home and read what he'd been printing that day. I always saw him reading.
Yeah.
He never pushed me to read, but it was always there, and I just got into it, and I got into comic books and books linked to things I was watching, like James Bond Jr., things like that. And now, as a teacher and a reading leader, I sort of have the same outlook in that I need to have the kids see me and other members of staff, male and female, as readers, and then they need to see us doing it and getting pleasure from it. We have to fill that role if their parents can't fill that role.
Do you recognise what Joanne Harris describes? Do you see a divide? I don't know whereabouts in Derby you are, but I mean, if you're near the old coalfields or something like that, the idea that books are girly. Do you see that at all in the classroom?
I think so. Yeah, I think we see boys who are very, very sport driven, football driven, and if they have a male role model who isn't a reader, or they haven't got a role model full stop, they're not going to see it as something that's worthwhile. They don't see it as a financial future. They see it as, they look at things like gaming and football and social media, and they see people making fortunes out of that, and they think that's where they want to go.
Gosh,
and they don't make that step. They don't make that link in terms of they need to be able to read to get any kind of decent job, and they don't see it, and they don't get the pleasure from it because they're not invested in it.
Does it work? I mean, you're not going to sit here and say, "No, James, I'm rubbish at my job." But can you see the difference that you make? Can you see a result? Can you see success in front of you? Sometimes
I can see how by targeting certain kids and certain groups of kids, you can engage them, and if you find the right one or two books, it ignites that fire.
Yeah.
And you got them then, and then the job is done. Have
you got any bankers? Have you got any books that you think, right, I'm pulling that one out now for this lad?
I think the key for us is to invest time in the start of any 2 or 3 great books, and it gets them, and it's up to them. I particularly find things like Beetle Boy and things like The Goldfish Boy and graphic novels are great for starting boys off and sort of taking away that fear factor.
Yes,
it's not a scary thing to do, and even just short, funny ones before they get into something.
Yeah, I mean, it's habit. It's a habit forming need, isn't it? In the healthiest of senses. Do you know? Someone sent me just a wonderful interview. Thank you, John. With Tony Mortimer, who listeners of a certain age will recognise and no doubt reel from the news that he's 50 now, the former lead singer of East 17. He I don't know why this interview came about. We gave an interview to The Guardian a couple of years ago about discovering books during lockdown, and he was 50 before he read his first novel. And he says books are just pure escapism, aren't they? He marvels down the phone from his home in Essex. The plot twists, the descriptions, the metaphors, it engages your imagination like no other medium. It makes your worries disappear. And he goes on to say he wished he'd made the discovery sooner because there was too much peer pressure at school not to bother, especially for boys. But with nothing else to occupy him during lockdown, he decided to give novels a go. It gave me a sense of massive accomplishment. I was really proud of myself, and I thought I enjoyed that. I'm going to try some more. And he's now notched up, by the time he gave this interview at the end of 2020, he'd notched up about 70 books. What a lovely, lovely interview that is. Robert's in Uddingston in Glasgow. Robert, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Pleasure to speak to you.
Nice.
It was the discovery of audiobooks that really made me fall in love with books. I'm a very, very poor reader,
right?
Through a few reasons.
Sure.
So when I was a boy, I hated. I just wouldn't read. Tied myself in knots. But when I started my own business, I would work all the hours. Listen to the radio during the day, but come maybe 5-6 o'clock, the radio would get kind of rubbish, So
Steady on. I mean, we got Andrew Marr on at 6 o'clock now, and that may have been true many years ago when we had someone else in that slot. But I mean, it's Andrew Marr now. 6 o'clock is when things get exciting. They get tasty.
Well, see, that wasn't an option back in the day, you know. So I just looked at YouTube, and you know, there's a lot of audiobooks on there, and you know, and then I subscribe to a few of the audiobook websites now. So. I just love them. You know, even when I'm out walking the dog now, I would rather listen to a book or a podcast than listen to music. You know,
it engages you more, especially if you're doing exercise. I find it just gives you something, because I'm not someone who enjoys exercising much, so I concentrate on what I'm listening to. And somehow don't notice the pain, the horror of the rowing machine or whatever it is that I'm forcing myself to do.
Yeah.
How old were you when that happened, if you don't mind me asking?
When I started listening to audiobooks?
Yeah.
Late 20s. In fact, about 30. About 30 actually.
Yeah, so quite. I mean, it's a big gap, isn't it? It's a bit like
absolutely.
I mean, Tony Mortimer was 50, but you just discover that. What is it? Yeah. It's like a new gear, isn't it? In a car, it's just you've just discovered something that you can do with your brain that you hadn't done you can't find any other way of doing it. And a story rather than the radio or a conversation. It's a story. It's like being told a story.
That's you know, and you don't have the kind of repetition of, you know, listening to music, things like that. You know, it's, you know, I mean, and for by the kind of fantasy novels, you know, I love biographies and autobiographies as well, and you know, you get to find out about fascinating people that, you know, you didn't know about before. But
and their stories as well. I mean, the biographies and autobiographies are stories as well. It's in the simplest sense of the word. Robert, thank you, mate. It's good to know. I said I wouldn't do it. Yeah, so I'm not going to. Christopher is in Manchester. Christopher, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Christopher. What's on your
mind?
How
are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
Yeah, so I was about 18 years old, and I was sent to young offenders. Prior to that, there was little encouragement in my family to read or anything like that.
Right.
I went to young offenders in Lancaster Farms and causing a bit of trouble on the wings. So we got our basic communities took off us, so the television and everything like that.
Right.
And then I was introduced to the library via that, and I took a couple of books out, a few fantasy books.
Yeah. About
5 months down the line, that was it. Fell absolutely in love with it. I don't even think the TV got turned on after that. About 5 months into my sentence, I found a book, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Good grief.
I read it front to back, and I reckon it probably saved my life. Ever since then, I read.
It's almost like a self-help book in the modern parlance, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Wow.
So, I was able to apply it. I was able to apply it to my life. Switched it completely round. I had about another year to spend in young offenders at the time.
Yeah.
Just went through it. Read lots of stoicism, different philosophies and stuff like that. Still mixing it up with a bit of fantasy. And like I said, now it's part of my everyday life. It's part of my daily routine. 30 minutes a day at least reading a book. I have a young boy now.
Come on.
And I find that the only way to encourage him, he has a lot of things outside of that, which he's saying, reading isn't cool, his friends and stuff.
Sure.
And I don't want to put him on it. So what we have now is we have a bookshelf in the front room. He has the books there. He sees me reading them.
Yeah.
I'm not a soft person, pretty tough guy. I'm a big lad. I'm a working class lad as well. He gets to see me in large books, and he said, he gets to see that. And going back to the original question as well as in regards to encouragement, I was never encouraged to read. My little sister, though, she was, and she's gone to university now, and she was pushed. The books were bought for her. She had Waterstone cards every birthday, so she could have it stocked up. Yeah, so she could that. Again, I wasn't discouraged not to read. I just wasn't encouraged to read.
Because you'd be playing sport, or you'd be doing stuff more.
Yeah, back obviously when I was younger, causing trouble as well, which obviously led to younger friends and stuff. But yeah, it was more sports. I was being out with my friends, and my friends' dads weren't like that as well. So we didn't have that sort of like one of us in the group that broke the mold. Whereas now, when I came out, I broke that mold. So when I came in with my friends and they got to see me reading, at first it was, it was like, oh, well, what are you reading that for? Well, why have you got that with you? And now, I've got them via audio books. I've got them listening to audio books, and now it's pretty strange, So, I'm getting them to read different books and stuff, so it's interesting.
It sounds absolutely brilliant. It's a lovely, lovely story. You should write it. Have you thought about that? How Marcus Aurelius saved my life. I could put you in touch with my publisher. That would be such an interesting story.
Yeah, I might do my own meditations yet, James.
I'm not joking, Christopher. I'm not joking. Honestly, it would be an incredible story to tell. Just briefly, for people listening, when you say that it changed my life, what do you mean? Just give us a couple of ideas about what you mean when you say that.
Okay, so obviously, when you read, let's talk about the book in particular, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and getting into Stoic. I was able to kind of stop blaming the outside world for the actions that I was doing.
You have power over your mind, not outside events. That bit of the message.
Exactly that. So, for example, when I was getting a lot of trouble, it was always an outside force to blame. It wasn't me. It was the work. I was working class. I didn't have a lot of money. Of course, I had to steal. Of course, I had to drug deal. Because that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I would make up these excuses by reading that book. I took the blame away from them. I put it on myself, and I was in control of the actions and the outcome. And for be reading that, it was a sudden realization of wow, and I kind of, like I said, I turned it back around, and just obviously you don't repair yourself straight away. It's a process. So, but by me going back to my notes that I'd read and put down for meditations and going back to the book, which you're able to do because it's not a long book, it's a short diary. You're able to go back to your notes and your pinpoints, and you're able to go, right, this is what I need to work on. And it was a slow process. So, and here I am. I mean, I've got a full-time job now. I have 3 kids. I smashed life. I own my own home. So, and like I said, it saved my life. And I just wish, that in my earlier years, I'd been encouraged to read a little bit more. Maybe I would have found it sooner. Maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah, but also better late than never. It could have cost me a fortune in therapy to have some of the lessons that you learned just by picking up one book in the young offenders library. It really did. And I mean it. You should think about. Have you tried? I mean, do you write your own stuff yet, or have you thought about doing that? Or
So I spend a lot of time now just writing notes and stuff down, my thoughts and everything. So like I said, maybe, James,
you should.
Maybe.
Well, let me. You know where I am. If you want me to pass it on to my publisher, I'd be happy to. Seriously, when you've got something down on paper.
Right, well, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm James.
Anytime. That's a great tale. That's why we do this entire phone-in is for stories like that, Christopher. Take it easy. I'm going to have to go back and swat up on my Marcus Aurelius now. 12:32 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It is 12:34. A lot of love for Christopher coming in. If he does ever put pen to paper, I reckon we've shifted a few hundred copies of his book already before he's even written it. Alan sent a lovely message. I'm retired, James, and I volunteer at a local primary school to listen to children, especially those who struggle to listen to them read. There was one boy who would rarely read at home and then only to his mum. Within 6 months, his reading had improved, and 1 week after we finished the book, he asked if he could keep it so that he could take it home to read it to his dad because it was such a brilliant story and he thought that his dad would enjoy it. I told you this was one of the best subjects ever, didn't I? I bet you didn't believe me. And this is from Steve, who's in Hayworth. Reminds me of my brother-in-law, James, who I swear to God was scared of books. I knew he'd get something from it, so I hatched a plan. He's a big MotoGP fan, so I bought him Valentino Rossi's biography. He absolutely loved it and now reads every day. Just needed a little nudge in the right direction. I did, speaking of nudges, I mentioned a couple of the female authors who my current favourite genre of historical crime fiction. And I'll give you 2. S.J. Paris and Laura Shepherd Robinson are just brilliant, brilliant writers. Laura's book, most recently, Daughters of the Night, or Daughters of Night, I think, to be precise, is just I mean, you can read my quote on the back of it because I'll tell you what, it is absolutely superlative. And all of S.J. Paris's books, it's a pseudonym used by Stephanie Merritt, they are just absolutely magnificent. And what you do is you learn a lot about history while you're just turning the pages to find out what happens next. And so I put them, up there with C.J. Sanson and Andrew Taylor and some of the big names in British in male historical crime fiction. They absolutely, just picking up on Joanne Harris's points about thinking that women only write books for women, and just using those 2 examples among millions of writers who give the lie completely to that to that nonsense. 12:36 is the time. What did it for you? I don't think we're going to beat Christopher's story, are we? I mean, crikey. He's saved from a life of crime by Marcus Aurelius. That is just a staggering story. But that things like that, what broke the spell for you after a childhood where you were not encouraged to read books, perhaps not actively dissuaded, as Joanne Harris posits, but not encouraged, and then through luck or something else, luck or intervention, which is often luck as well, isn't it? Then it just happened. Owen's in Hitchin. Owen, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Christopher's was a great story. That's going to be a hard one to follow.
Well, it's your job.
Well, mine has an element of luck, really.
Yeah.
I think I was about 11. So about 11, but this was back in the 70s, so 1977. Now, people did this sort of thing when in the 70s. I was allowed to go and babysit for people who lived up the road, which just meant sitting in their house and screaming if anything happened to their baby or whatever. But I didn't mind because it was a Thursday night, and I thought, well, every Thursday night I can watch Top of the Pops. So I was quite happy. There wasn't a lot else you could really do in somebody else's house. Went round to the house, was ushered into the living room, and to my absolute horror, no telly. Look around and thinking, oh my God, they're those people. You hear about those people at school, the people that don't have tellies. The people who aren't allowed to watch ITV, and then the people
I had someone like that growing up. There was a family 4 doors up who weren't allowed to watch ITV, and they got a special dispensation when my sister and I were in the audience on Tiswas. They were allowed to watch it so that they could see if they could spot me and my sister on. Anyway, I digress. Carry on.
This story's got a little LBC connection, funny enough.
Gosh.
So there I am in this kind of 70s living room, one of those carriage clocks ticking away, making my life seem like it's ebbing so slowly, and I've got hours of it. And I look around, and they've just got bookshelves, but all the books have got the same sort of cover. There was this kind of red leather cover.
Right.
So after probably an hour of boredom, I just went and picked up one of these books, and it was Just William.
Oh.
Never heard of it before, but looked at all the pictures.
What
and just
a
thought,
stroke of luck, man, honestly.
I thought, these pictures are rubbish. Look at how old is that schoolboy?
Yeah.
So anyway, I had necessity forced me to do it. Anyway, started reading, and it just blew me away. I thought, what books about a boy like me who is naughty and silly and gets up to stuff. Anyway, read loads of them. That became my regular Thursday thing. Moved on to Jennings, I think, after that.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was a Saturday morning LBC radio show with Tommy Boyd called Jelly Bean.
Right, yeah.
And one day he did a show very similar to this one. It was for kids, and he said, ring up and tell me what you're reading. So I've got straight on the phone and rang up and started telling him about Just William, and I was really, effusive about it, telling everyone, you've got to read this, you've got to read this.
Oh,
I know it's old, but you've got to read it. And he said, well, ring me back next week until we've rung. And then I got to the end of something, and he said, well, what are you reading next? And I said, I'm going to read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory next.
Right.
And he went, well, ring us back next week, or they rang up.
Yeah.
Ring us back next week and tell us. So I was this leery, mouthy kid, banging on about this book, trying not to give away the ending.
Oh, lovely.
And then he said to me, can I speak to your mum or your dad? Or somebody did. And so I put my mum on the phone, and she was going, yeah, okay, yes. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay. Then he passed the phone back to me, and Tommy Boyd said, how would you like to come to LBC Studios and meet Roald Dahl and interview Roald Dahl on the radio?
Shut up.
So there I was, 11 or 12, on the tube up to Gough Square, I think it was.
Just
then.
off Fleet Street, wasn't it? Yeah. Steve Allen was on the schedule, wasn't he, back then? Steve Allen was still on the schedule.
Yeah. And I met Roald Dahl sat in his studio with the headphones on. I remember it most was giving these big LBC badges and pencils and stuff like that.
We haven't got any of those. Before you ask, we haven't got any of those anymore.
He wasn't the most... He didn't seem the most comfortable around children sort of bloke, to be fair. He was but what an amazing experience.
That is absolutely off the scale. I had no idea where you were going with that, but all the way to actual Roald Dahl. That's incredible. And you obviously you carried on reading for the rest of your life.
Yeah, carried on reading and then ended up writing but it was those books and those series of books and just
God, it's the road not taken. I mean, what if it had been a sort of I don't know, a Reader's Digest, boring old... But to get Richmal Crompton in your mitts at that age is like almost like divine intervention, isn't it? And I tell you what, I don't know if you've got any kids yourself, but they stand the test of time, those books. They really do.
Yes, they do. I mean, I even applied to be on the TV show, but never got anywhere near that. That would have been a brilliant full circle. But on the other hand, I'd love to round this story off by saying, and I pass that on to my kids. But I don't know, like a lot of parents, I fight a losing battle against technology, and it's such a hard thing to. We've tried so many books, especially my youngest though, he's 12, and it's just so hard to find the thing that's going to trigger him, but he's in a world where he's creating his own world,
that's true,
his own world online, and
Well,
I'm still plugging away.
And also be feeding his imagination in different ways. It's a shame he can't do a little bit of both, isn't it? But
of course. Well, I think we'll get there.
Of course you will.
We're going on holiday soon, and there'll be no technology
That's
there.
The spirit.
So I'll probably sneak a couple
force
of books
him for aversion therapy. Do you know, and you probably know this because you've obviously been listening longer than I have to LBC, but do you know that I think it was on that show, on the Jelly Bean show, when they used to have regular critics coming in, like teenage critics coming in to discuss films that were out or
yes.
Do you know which of those teenage critics on the Saturday morning show on LBC went on to be quite a well-known British politician?
Oh, God. I'm not sure I want to know.
No, you do. It's all right, this one. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. No, give up.
Ed Miliband. We've got the tape somewhere.
Fair play.
We've got the tape somewhere of a young Ed Miliband offering up his recommendations for your weekend viewing on the down at the Flicks or the books that had come out. Yeah, it'd be amazing, really. I mentioned it to him when he came in. And that's a lovely story. And I'll tell you what, you rose to the challenge.
You've been a constant companion.
What a lovely thing to say. I shall pass it on to Steve because he has been a constant companion. He was on air back then, and of course he's still on there now. And you rose to the challenge, Owen, of following Christopher's magical story as well. 12:43 is the time. Errol is in Tollerton. Errol, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Errol.
Well, basically, at the age of 14, I got kicked out of school. Couldn't read, couldn't write. Dropped my way into employment. Then, at a young age, 16, going 17, my girlfriend at the time had children for me. So basically, as my kids start getting older, I start giving them books, and then asking them, "Tell me the words you're going to read." And they used to tell me, and they used to go like, and I said, "Spell the word properly, boy." And they used to say, and then afterwards I kind of caught on. Anyway, to cut a long story short, what happened eventually, in 2006, I became an English teacher, graduated with distinction.
No way.
My first qualification, because I hated English, you see. So that was my barrier. And from there I done sociology, psychology.
That's incredible. And so you taught yourself to read by kind of copying your children without them realising that that's what you were doing.
That's correct.
That's incredible.
That's correct.
That's incredible.
And for people who have children who don't want to read, what we as parents need to do, because I've got two small ones still, is give them incentive, because they're on the computer. They love computer. But what I've done, I've offered them money. I said, every book you read, I'll give you £5. Now, my kids are reading 7 books a month.
And you're bankrupt.
I said, no, it's all good. I'm giving them. They're liking, and now they're enjoying reading more than the computer. So it's good to give children incentive. Let them know that whatever they're doing, there's good in it. They will get paid for it.
I love it. Maybe Owen can try that. It's not about out on holiday, actually. It'd be a good opportunity to have a bit of extra holiday money if you get to the end of a book. And, of course, what you're doing, when you do that eventually or quite quickly it will become a reward in itself. But just to get them over the line, to give them a cash reward for the first few books and then for the rest of their lives, the reward is the book itself. The reward is reading the books and getting the stories. Errol, what a lovely story, mate. That's an absolute zinger of a tale. Thank you so much for sharing it as well. 12:46 is the time. I told you this was one of the best subjects we ever do. It's 10 to 1 already, and no, I don't know where the time goes either, but I do know that if you are seeking to escape from the rat race, then there are a few better ways of doing so than with books. And I mean, crikey, from when we were kids, there's so many more demands upon your time and attention now. So I don't think any parent should beat themselves up for over the fact that their own children read a bit less than they do, or a lot less than they do. The appeal of technology now is siren, isn't it? Epic and siren. But if you can get books into your boy's brain in particular, you give them a priceless gift. And it's the quality of the calls, as one of you's just put it. That's 3 incredible callers in a row, James. That's got to be a hat trick. Does radio ever get any better than this? Says David in Shepherd's Bush. Truly inspiring. But more than any other subject under the sun, I'm absolutely nothing without you on a subject like this. I just sit here wanging on about J.D. Salinger and my own efforts, and no one wants that, do they? But we were going to talk about tattoos as well this hour, but we've been completely overtaken by events because... Is it Virgin? Is it one of the solutions to the airline crisis? Oddly, it ties in with the conversation we had in the last hour, is that Virgin Airlines are now going to allow cabin crew to have visible tattoos. They must be... listen, this isn't a slur on tattoos. There's a whole chapter in my last book about why I used to be an idiot when it comes to tattoos and nurses and teachers and all that kind of thing. When I say they must be desperate for staff, I don't mean they must be desperate for staff because they're hiring people with tattoos. I mean, to have sat down and come up with that as a possible way of getting more people through the door means that they are desperate to get more people through the door. I mean, and these are visible tattoos as well, so... you know, presumably short sleeve sometimes on board aeroplanes. I don't know, but that we were going to talk about that, and no chance given the calls that continue to come in. If you want to add, there's still time to this lovely collection of contributions. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Michael's in Croydon. Michael, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, good morning, James. Hi. Thanks for having my call.
Very welcome.
Well, I think sometimes, great calls, by the way, up to this point. I've really enjoyed them. I think sometimes it can just be a little nudge that moves you in a direction, like the chancing upon just William in a house where, there's no TV. Mm-hmm. But in my case, I think that I went to a good school, but I was very sporty. My dad's one of those no-nonsense Dubliners who is very much into his boxing and his true crime.
Yeah.
So there was this perception, I suppose, that reading wasn't something that we just did in the household. And in fact, I remember that the only books on offer were in the toilet. We had things like, Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, which weren't really likely to appeal to a...
Were they in the toilet to be read, or was your father casting political judgment upon the content?
I just think they were looking for a place to keep the books, and we didn't really have much storage space, so why not just put them above the loo? But, obviously it just wasn't a culture in the house, and there were plenty of true crime books around. The Sun newspaper was the Daily Fair, but I think I was just fortunate enough to come into contact with someone who genuinely loved books. It was just a friend of the family. And as with, say, what you're doing, I think at times, you hear someone and there's something about the way they express themselves.
Yes.
There's a turn of phrase. There's this kind of delight in language. There's what jouissance, and I would hear that and think, where did that come from? And sure enough, he probably saw the interest in me and just started plying me with books, short stories, which is what I've done because I've subsequently become a teacher.
Fantastic.
And
short stories are a good way, and particularly for boys in these days of short attention spans and stuff like that. Yes. And we go back to Christopher, don't we? Because Roald Dahl Tales the Unexpected are absolute belters, aren't they, for that?
They are, yes.
Early years. And I love a writer called Saki. His short stories sometimes only run to a couple of pages, so there's absolutely no problem getting stuck into those. And they've got beautiful language and real twists and turns and stuff like that. I'd forgotten about that.
And just the way characters are drawn as well, James.
Yes.
I know with... he'd ply me with these Maupassant, French short story writer.
Yeah.
And again, 2-3 pages... you're elsewhere. You're in other life. You fall into another life, and it just gives you that sense of moving in a space that you couldn't have been around because it's 100 years ago, perhaps. But you get the sense of truly being present to the emotional lives of these people.
I'm a sucker for that stuff as well. I don't know whether, because it's the same for me. It serves the same purpose as fantasy books. A lot of callers have been talking about fantasy books, but I read some fantasy books and I've enjoyed them. But for me, the escapism element of great fiction works more in the past, as you suggest, than in an alternative future or in a kind of alternative universe. I guess it's just horses for courses, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, and I think especially with the younger people now, because I'm constantly around them and trying to sort of inveigle them into the reading side of things. And I always find the best way is, to realise, they may well enjoy, I don't know, parkour. And you think, well, actually, good books have been written by people who have steeped in that life and have like worked themselves out, in terms of putting down. Are there anything you're reading that really takes you into the personal world of the
Well, that's it. You find out what their enthusiasms are, and then you find a book to match it, which sounds simple, and no one's pretending that it is, as you as a teacher will appreciate. Michael, what a lovely hour. I could carry on with this, but I can't because Sheila's coming to the studio now, and that means Lindsay and Grimsby will have the final word on this beautiful subject. Lindsay, what's it going to be?
Hi. Well, firstly, can I just recommend a couple of series for books for boys?
Yeah.
As a school librarian, but boys who were reluctant to read would come in when the next one was due and kind of smuggle them out of the library.
I love it.
There was a stigma attached to them walking out proud with a book, but they still read them. The first series is by an author called Robert Muchamore, who's wrote about 13 books on the Henderson Boys and the Cherub series, all about a group of young people who are involved in kind of like, the Secret Service.
Wow.
And another one is Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Lambie. Okay. Again, a huge series of books that, I've seen boys follow and read every single one.
Gosh.
I've progressed from a school librarian who are vital to recommending books for boys as well, to an English teacher who, unfortunately, through some parents' evenings have sat in front of mums and dads, and mums have said, I read, dad doesn't, and dad seems to have that, why would I read kind of attitude.
Well, that's exactly what Joanne Harris is talking about there, almost word for word what you say.
It's not every
Of
dad,
course not. No, of course not. Of
not
course not.
Every dad, but those ones where the boys look up and sort of say, if dad's not reading,
I'm not reading.
Why do I need to read? And as the school
Silly
that
Silly dad.
Yeah, absolutely. The school that I work at, we encourage reading across the whole school. For the book day, we had a Drop Everything and Read where every teacher got involved with reading a page of a story. And I had so much great feedback from boys and girls saying how they enjoyed getting to that very last page of the book during, at period 5 of that day. And then on the other hand, my husband reads, and all my other children read, and my son, we've bought him books, we've encouraged him.
It's not happening. It's not happening. It's early days. It's early days, Lindsay.
Well, he is 23 now.
All right, it's not early days, Lindsay. It's not early days. You've absolutely carked it.
I've tried and I've tried and I've tried.
But there'll be one. There will be one that would get him, that would grab him. It's just finding it and getting it in front of him, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not that you don't like reading, it's just that you haven't found the book that you love reading yet, and I absolutely believe in that.
So do I. I tell you what, I wonder if Christopher's call, not that any of your charges are likely to end up in a Young Offenders Institute, but I wonder whether Christopher's call could be a teaching aid. We could play that out, and the discovery of Marcus Aurelius, setting him on a completely different path in life. It's a thing of beauty, isn't it? Thank you for everything you do, because you're dead right to remind us that the teachers and the school librarians, perhaps in particular, can play a role that some parents are just not able to play or not willing to play for a whole variety of reasons. I'm going to say it one more time. I told you that was one of the best subjects we ever do, and we haven't done it for such a long time, which is probably why everybody who rang in was so brilliant. Thank you. We'll do something similar tomorrow from 10. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
I was just saying to your producer before I came in, I've really enjoyed this hour of James's programme.
First time for everything, Sheila.
Well, I didn't hear the last one because that's the first time I've heard you discuss this, or I didn't notice last one.
No, we haven't done it for ages.
It
used to be one of my hardy perennials.
Yeah. One of my first memories with my mum, aged 4, is she took me by the hand when we first moved house, to the house that we still have, and took me straight down to the local library, to the area we'd moved in, joined the library, still got my little ticket.
Wow.
Remember the first book I got out, the full hit, and it does set a tone, doesn't it, for kids?
Yeah, totally.
Definitely.
Totally.
Thanks very much, James. That was really interesting. 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 Very much, James.